She found a rusted key in her mother's Bible. It opened a barn no one knew existed. For 18 years, she believed she was abandoned. What she discovered would not only rewrite her past, but force her to choose her future. If you've ever felt lost, or like your story was written by someone else, then I need you to listen to this. And if it resonates, hit that subscribe button, because we're building a community here for people who've had to find their own way home. The day I turned 18 was the day I became homeless. It's a strange way to mark your entrance into adulthood, but for a ward of the state, it's the only way. Freedom tastes a lot like cold asphalt and exhaust fumes. I stood on the curb outside the Northgate group home, the place that had been my container for the last 6 years, with a single black duffel bag at my feet. It held everything I owned: 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a worn copy of a book I'd read a dozen times, and $112 in cash. Ms. Albright, my final social worker, stood beside me, her expression a practiced blend of encouragement and pity. She'd been kind, in a detached, professional way. She saw hundreds of kids like me cycle through the system. We were files, not faces. Cases, not causes. I was just the Tuesday morning discharge. "You have the number for the Transitional Housing Office, Ilara?" she asked, her voice thin against the morning traffic. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The lump in my throat felt enormous, a solid thing I couldn't swallow. "And you have your paperwork?" Another nod. My birth certificate, my social security card, the official letter declaring me a free agent in the world, all tucked into a manila envelope that felt both flimsy and impossibly heavy. She sighed, a small puff of white in the frigid November air. "This is it, then." She gave my shoulder a brief, awkward squeeze. It was the most physical contact we'd ever had. Then she pressed a small cardboard box into my hands. It was sealed with yellowing tape. "These were your mother's," she said, her voice dropping a little. "They've been in storage at the county office. Legally, they're yours now." I stared at the box. It was maybe the size of a shoebox, light and unsubstantial. All that was left of the woman who gave me her eyes and her name and nothing else. I'd spent my whole life building a wall around the hollow space she'd left inside me. And now here was a box that threatened to knock it all down. I wanted to hand it back, to say I didn't want it. But I just nodded again, my fingers going numb around the cardboard edges. "Good luck, Ilara," Ms. Albright said, and then she turned and walked back through the metal gate, which clicked shut behind her with a sound of finality that echoed in my bones. I was alone. The street suddenly felt wider, the buildings taller, the sky a flat, indifferent gray. For a few minutes, I just stood there, a statue of a girl on the edge of her own life. People bustled past, their faces set, their destinations clear. I had nowhere to go. The Transitional Housing Office wouldn't even open for another hour, and I knew from the other kids that getting a bed was like winning a lottery you didn't even want to play. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I started walking. I walked until the duffel bag strap dug a raw trench into my shoulder, and the $112 in my pocket felt like a joke. I ended up at a bus station, not to go anywhere, but just to sit. It was a place full of people in between, a place where no one looked at you twice for being alone with a single bag. I found a hard plastic chair, set the duffel bag between my feet, and placed the cardboard box on my lap. My mother's things. I ran my thumb over the brittle tape. Part of me wanted to throw it in the nearest trash can, to sever the final, frayed thread connecting me to a past I couldn't remember and a woman I'd never known. But I couldn't. It was the first inheritance I'd ever received. I sat there for an hour, maybe 2. The announcements for arriving and departing buses became a kind of hypnotic mantra. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I picked up my bag and walked out of the station, away from the city center, into a neighborhood of pawn shops and check-cashing places. I found a motel with a flickering neon sign that promised cheap, weekly rates. The room smelled of stale smoke and bleach. The bedspread was a hideous floral pattern, thin and scratchy, but it had a door with a lock. I paid for 2 nights, leaving me with less than $50. It was a stupid, reckless thing to do. But I couldn't face the thought of a shelter. Not tonight. Tonight I needed a door I could close. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, the cardboard box still in my hands. The silence of the room was louder than the noise of the bus station. It was the sound of my own solitude. With trembling fingers, I peeled back the old tape. It came away with a dry, ripping sound. Inside, there wasn't much. A small, velvet pouch holding a silver locket, tarnished and empty. A faded photograph of a baby that I assumed was me, but it could have been any baby. And at the bottom, a book. It was a Bible, the cover made of soft, cracked black leather. It was worn at the edges, the kind of object that has been held and read and worried over for years. There was no name on it. My mother wasn't religious, as far as I knew from the scant details in my file. I opened it. The pages were thin as onion skin, filled with tiny, spidery text. A faint scent of pressed flowers and something else, something vaguely metallic, rose from the book. I flipped through the pages. There were no notes in the margins, no underlined verses. It seemed untouched. But as I neared the middle, in the Book of Psalms, my fingers brushed against something hard and flat. Tucked between the pages, nestled against a verse about being a stranger in the land, was a key. It was an old skeleton key, dark with rust, the head shaped like a simple clover. It was heavy, real. It felt ancient. It made no sense. Why would my mother, a woman who had nothing, who left me with nothing, hide a key in a Bible? A key to what? A post office box? A storage locker she'd long since stopped paying for? A home that had been sold off decades ago? It was a mystery with no context, a question with no answer. Just another piece of the gaping void that was my family history. I closed the Bible, the key now cold in my palm. The weight of it was grounding. It was a tangible piece of her. As I sat there, staring at the key, my phone buzzed. It was a cheap pay-as-you-go model, and I almost never got calls. The number was blocked. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Am I speaking with Alara Vance?" a man's voice asked. It was calm, professional, and deep. "Who's asking?" I said, my voice tight with suspicion. It was probably a collections agency for some medical bill from when I was a kid, a final parting gift from the state. "My name is Arthur Davies. I'm an attorney. I was the legal representative for your mother, Sarah Vance." My breath caught. My mother. He said her name. Sarah. I'd only ever seen it on documents. Hearing it spoken aloud was like hearing a word in a foreign language that you suddenly, inexplicably understand. My mother? Yes. I'm calling because with your 18th birthday, you are now the legal heir to her estate. It's not much, I'm afraid. A small property in Havenwood County. It's been held in trust. A property. Land. A place. The words didn't compute. "I don't understand. My file says she had nothing." "The file is not always the complete picture, Miss Vance. The property is quite remote. The house itself is likely uninhabitable. There are also significant back taxes owed. Frankly, it's more of a liability than an asset." His voice was dry, factual. "However, a development corporation has made an offer to purchase the land. It's a modest offer, but it would be enough to clear the debt and leave you with a small sum. Enough for a fresh start." A fresh start. The words echoed what Ms. Albright had said. Everyone wanted me to have a fresh start, but all it felt like was a clean slate. Wiped so thoroughly, there was nothing left of me on it. An offer? Yes. They're planning a large resort development in the area. Your parcel is one of the last holdouts. They're offering $20,000. $20,000. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding. It was a new life, an apartment, a car, college. It was the answer to every problem I had. I need to think, I stammered, my mind reeling. The key in my hand suddenly felt heavier. Of course, Mr. Davies said, but the offer is time-sensitive, and I must advise you, holding on to the property will be a significant financial burden. I'll email you the details of the offer and the property information. My contact information is there as well. Please take a look and let me know your decision. The line went dead. I sat in the silent, stale-smelling motel room, staring at the rusted key in one hand and the phone in the other. A property, an offer, a choice. For the first time in my life, I had a choice that wasn't just about which line to stand in or which form to fill out. It was a real choice. I could take the money and run, build a new life completely disconnected from the past. Or I could go to this place, this piece of land that belonged to her, this liability. I looked down at the key. It was a key to something, and I realized, with a certainty that settled deep in my gut, that I couldn't make a choice until I knew what it opened. The bus ride to Havenwood County took 7 hours. I spent the last of my money on the ticket, keeping just a few dollars for emergencies. It felt like the most definitive act of my life, this deliberate journey toward a ghost. The city's dense, gray architecture slowly gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to wide, open farmland. The sky seemed to get bigger, the colors richer. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of the window and watched the world change. I was leaving the only life I knew, a life of concrete and institutions, for a place I couldn't even picture. Mr. Davies' email had included a satellite map. The property was a small, green rectangle surrounded by miles of darker green, with a single, winding road leading to it. A red pin marked a spot labeled Vance Property. My property. I tried to imagine my mother there. Did she watch these same fields roll by? Did she breathe this same air? The questions were endless and unanswerable. I felt a strange mix of terror and hope. Every mile the bus traveled was a mile further from the sterile safety of the system and a mile closer to a truth I might not be ready for. The bus finally pulled into the town of Havenwood. It wasn't so much a town as a crossroads with a gas station, a general store with a peeling Coca-Cola sign, and a post office. That was it. I got off the bus, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, the Bible containing the key tucked safely inside. The air was different here. It was clean and sharp, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. The silence was profound, broken only by the chirping of a bird and the distant hum of the departing bus. The solitude was no longer just in my head, it was all around me. According to the map, the property was another 2 miles down a road that branched off the main highway. There were no taxis, no Ubers, no one to call. So I started walking again. This walk was different from the aimless, desperate trek through the city. This was a pilgrimage. The road was unpaved, rutted from rain and time. Towering pine trees lined either side, their branches forming a dark canopy overhead. The light that filtered through was green and dappled. It felt like walking through a tunnel, a passage to another world. I saw no other cars, no other people. Just the road and the woods and the sound of my own footsteps on the gravel. After what felt like an eternity, I saw it. A rusted mailbox, leaning at a precarious angle, half swallowed by overgrown bushes. The name on the side was almost completely faded, but I could just make out the letters, VANCE. This was it. I pushed through a thicket of thorny vines that had grown across the driveway, and then I saw the house. Mr. Davies had said it was likely uninhabitable. That was an understatement. It was a skeleton, a small wooden farmhouse that had begun the slow, graceful process of collapsing into the earth. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired old horse. The porch tilted at a drunken angle, one of its support posts having rotted away completely. Windows were shattered, the empty panes like vacant eyes. Paint peeled off the clapboard siding in long, curling strips, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. My heart sank. This was my inheritance, a ruin, a pile of debt and decay. The $20,000 from the developers suddenly seemed like a winning lottery ticket. All I had to do was sign a paper, and this whole sad story would be over. I could walk away. But I had come this far. I had to see. I carefully made my way up the groaning steps of the porch. The front door was ajar, hanging from a single hinge. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air inside was thick and musty, heavy with the smell of dust, mildew, and forgotten time. Sunlight streamed through the dirty, broken windows in thick, golden shafts, illuminating swirling galaxies of dust motes. The inside was as derelict as the outside. Plaster had crumbled from the walls, revealing the lath beneath. The floorboards were warped and stained. In the main room, a single overturned chair lay next to a stone fireplace filled with debris. A small kitchen area was off to the side, its cupboards hanging open, empty. Everything of value, if there ever had been anything, was long gone. It was just a shell. I walked through the small rooms, my footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. There was a bedroom with a rusted bed frame and a mattress that had been torn apart by animals. A bathroom with a cracked toilet and a sink stained with rust. There was nothing here. No clues, no remnants of a life, no sign of the woman who had lived and breathed in this space. Just emptiness. A profound, aching emptiness that mirrored my own. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. This was a mistake. I had wasted my last dollars chasing a ghost, only to find an empty house. There was nothing here for me. The hope that had carried me all this way curdled into bitter disappointment. I was an idiot, a sentimental fool. I should have just taken the money. I walked back outside, blinking in the sudden brightness. I stood in the overgrown yard, a sense of defeat settling on me like a shroud. I was about to turn and walk away, to head back to the highway and hitch a ride to anywhere, when my eyes caught on something. Through a thick stand of birch trees at the far edge of the property, almost completely obscured by years of untamed growth, I saw a sliver of dark wood, another roofline. It wasn't the house, it was another building. My heart started to beat a little faster. The property description Mr. Davies had sent only listed the main dwelling. There was no mention of a second structure. I pushed my way through the tangled undergrowth, branches scratching at my face and arms. The trees were so dense that the building was invisible until I was almost upon it. It was a barn. A large, weathered barn, its wood aged to a deep, silvery gray. It was in much better condition than the house. The roof was steep and intact, the walls straight and solid. It looked sturdy, defiant against the decay that had claimed the rest of the property. But the most striking thing was the main door. It was a massive, sliding door, and it was secured with a single, heavy iron hasp. And in that hasp was a lock, a big, old-fashioned padlock, its surface a crust of orange and brown rust. It looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. My hand went instinctively to my bag. I pulled out the old Bible, my fingers fumbling with the cover. I opened it to the book of Psalms. And there it was, the rusted key. It felt like I was moving in a dream. I walked up to the barn door, my breath held tight in my chest. The key felt cold and heavy in my hand. It looked just like the lock, a matched set of corrosion and age. I hesitated for a moment. This was it, the reason I had come. Whatever was behind this door was the secret my mother had hidden. Taking a deep, shaky breath, I slid the key into the lock. It was stiff, resistant. I had to jiggle it, push it with all my strength. For a second, I thought it wouldn't work, that this was just another dead end, another cruel joke. But then, with a grating shriek of metal on metal, the key slid all the way in. I gripped the head of the key and turned. The mechanism inside the lock fought back, groaning in protest. Then, with a loud, resonant click that seemed to break a silence that had held for years, the lock sprang open. The heavy lock fell into my hand, surprisingly weighty. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the barn door. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. This was a threshold. On one side was the life I knew, a life of questions, of emptiness, of being a ward of the state. On the other side was something else. A truth. A secret kept for 18 years. I slid the massive door sideways. It moved with a deep, groaning rumble, the sound of a giant waking from a long slumber. A wide rectangle of daylight cut into the darkness within. The air that rolled out was different from the house. It wasn't the smell of damp and decay. It smelled of old, dry wood, of sawdust, of oil, and faintly of turpentine. It was the smell of work. I stepped inside. It took a moment for my eyes to adjust to the gloom. The interior was vast, the ceiling soaring up to a high, vaulted peak where slivers of light pierced through tiny gaps in the roof shingles, looking like stars in a dusty cosmos. This wasn't a barn for animals. It was a workshop. Along one wall stood a long, heavy workbench littered with tools. Chisels, hammers, saws, all coated in a thick blanket of dust, but arranged with a sense of order. There were canvases leaning against a wall, all blank. Bags of what looked like plaster or clay were stacked in a corner, hard as rock now. In the center of the space, under a draped canvas cloth, was the shape of something large and bulky. This was my mother's place. Not the house. The house was just a place to sleep. This barn, this was where she lived. I walked deeper into the space, my boots stirring up clouds of dust that danced in the beams of light. I ran my hand along the workbench, leaving a clean streak in the grime. I could almost feel her here. Her presence was a palpable thing, an energy left behind in the silent tools and unfinished projects. It was a place of creation, of purpose, and it felt nothing like the ruin I had inherited. It felt like a sanctuary. I walked to the center of the barn and reached for the canvas cloth. I hesitated, then pulled it back. Underneath was not a tractor or a piece of farm equipment. It was a sculpture, or the beginnings of one. A large armature of twisted metal and wire, shaped vaguely like a human figure, reaching upward. It was raw, unfinished, but powerful. My mother was an artist, a sculptor. The file had said she was an unemployed transient. It had never mentioned this. It had never mentioned her passion, her skill. The system had reduced her to a label, erased the most important part of her. I felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. They hadn't just taken me from her, they had taken her from me, replacing the real person with a caricature of failure. I turned away from the sculpture, my eyes scanning the rest of the barn. If she hid this place, she hid it for a reason. There had to be more. I started searching methodically. I looked in drawers, under benches, inside old crates. Nothing. Just more tools, more supplies. My earlier despair began to creep back in. Maybe this was it. Maybe the secret was just that my mother was an artist, a truth the world had forgotten. It was a beautiful, tragic secret, but it didn't change anything. It didn't explain why she gave me up. It didn't help me decide what to do with this land. I was about to give up when my foot scuffed against a floorboard that moved slightly under my weight. It gave a little, a subtle dip that the others didn't have. I knelt down, my heart starting to pound again. I ran my fingers along the edges of the board. There was a small notch cut into one side, almost invisible. I hooked my fingernails into it and pulled. The board lifted easily. And there, nestled in the dark space beneath the floor, was a metal box. It was an old army surplus ammunition can, painted olive drab, sealed tight. It was heavy. I lifted it out and set it on the dusty floor. The latches were stiff, but I managed to pry them open. The lid creaked back. My breath caught in my throat. The box was filled with letters, dozens of them, tied in bundles with twine. On top of the first bundle was a single envelope with my name, Ilara, written in a looping, elegant script that I had never seen before, but knew, instinctively, was hers. And beneath the letters, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thick, heavy package. I set the package aside and picked up the first envelope. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely open it. I unfolded the pages. The letter was dated a week after I was born. "My dearest Ilara," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you have found your way home. I hope you are 18. I hope you are strong. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. There is so much I need to tell you, a story that no one else will ever know. The first thing you must understand is that I did not abandon you. I protected you. Every single day since I let you go has been an act of will, a promise I made to keep you safe. Giving you up was the hardest thing I have ever done, and it will be the last thing I do. I love you more than these words can say. I love you more than my own life." I had to stop reading. The words blurred through a sudden hot film of tears. I love you. 3 words I had waited my entire life to hear. I sank to the floor of the barn, the letter clutched in my hand, and for the first time, I cried. I cried for the baby in the faded photograph, for the girl who grew up in sterile rooms believing she was unwanted. I cried for the mother I never knew, the woman who wrote these words and then disappeared. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen, the dust of the barn floor mixing with my tears. After a long time, I wiped my face on my sleeve and continued to read. The story that unfolded in those letters was darker and more complicated than I could have ever imagined. The letters told a story that was a world away from the sterile, judgmental summary in my social services file. My mother, Sarah, had come to Havenwood to escape a bad situation in the city. She was a sculptor, a talented one, who had won a small scholarship to art school but had to drop out when the money ran out. This property, which had belonged to her grandmother, was her refuge. It was a place where she could work, a place where she could breathe. The barn was her studio, her sanctuary. She built it with her own hands, trading sculptures for lumber and labor with the few locals who appreciated her art. But Havenwood wasn't just a quiet, rural town. It had a dark underbelly. A local crew, involved in smuggling and other rackets, saw a use for her unique talents. They weren't interested in her art, they were interested in her skill with metal and hidden compartments. They started by commissioning her to make things, custom containers, false-bottomed crates. At first, she didn't know what they were for. She needed the money desperately. The work was challenging, and they paid well. But soon, she realized what she was a part of. She was helping them hide things, stolen goods, maybe worse. She was their unwilling artisan. When she tried to refuse, they threatened her. They knew she was alone, isolated. She was trapped. Then she found out she was pregnant. With me. The father was a man who had passed through town, a brief and hopeful connection that had dissolved as quickly as it formed. Suddenly, it wasn't just her own safety she had to worry about. It was mine. The threats from the crew escalated. They saw her pregnancy as a liability, but also as leverage. They made it clear that if she ever went to the police, if she ever stopped working for them, they would hurt her. And they would hurt me. The letters from this period were frantic, filled with fear. They watched the house, Ilara, she wrote in one. I see their truck on the main road at night, the headlights cutting through the trees. I can't leave. They own me. But they will not own you. She hatched a desperate plan. She would create a final masterpiece for them, a complex piece that would take months to build, something that would satisfy them long enough for her to disappear. And at the same time, she would erase me from her life, To protect me, she contacted social services from a payphone in a neighboring county, spinning a story of being a transient, unstable mother unable to care for a child. She made herself sound like the worst possible person, ensuring they would take me. She gave them a false history, a narrative of abandonment that would sever any connection between me and this place, between me and her. It broke my heart to write you out of my story, she wrote, the ink smudged in places as if by tears. I had to make them believe you were gone for good, that I had no one and nothing left to lose. It was the only way to make you invisible to them, the only way to keep you safe. The day she gave me up, she drove to a bus station 2 towns over and handed me, a tiny, sleeping baby, to a social worker. She never looked back. It was, she wrote, the only way to sell the lie. She returned to Havenwood and told the crew that she had given her baby away, that she was alone again. She finished their project, and then, using the money they paid her, she planned her escape. But she never made it. The last letter was different. The handwriting was weaker, shakier. It was dated nearly a year after I was born. I'm sick, my love, she wrote. Something in my lungs. The doctor says it might have been the dust from the plaster, the fumes from the resins, or maybe it's just a broken heart. I don't have much time. The crew thinks I've left the state, but I'm still here, in the barn. I can't leave this place. It's the only thing I have to give you. I've hidden this box. I've hidden the key. I pray that one day you will find it. In here, you will find my story. You will also find the money they paid me for that last terrible job. It feels wrong to keep it, but it feels more wrong not to give it to you. Use it to start over, or use it to fight. The choice must be yours. The developers are already sniffing around this land. They are vultures. Selling might be the easiest path. It will give you money, a clean break. But staying would mean fighting for this place, for my memory, for the home I never got to give you. Whatever you choose, know this: you were not abandoned. You were saved. I read the last line, and the letters fell from my lap. The entire narrative of my life, the story I had told myself for 18 years, was a lie. But it was a lie constructed out of love, a terrible, sacrificial love. My mother hadn't thrown me away. She had put me in a lifeboat and pushed me out to sea, choosing to go down with the ship herself. The anger I had felt earlier was gone, replaced by a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight. I grieved for her lonely, terrifying last year. I grieved for the life we could have had. I grieved for the artist who died in her own sanctuary, surrounded by her silent, unfinished work. I sat there on the floor of the barn for hours, the sun moving across the sky, the beams of light shifting through the dusty air. The world had tilted on its axis. And then my phone buzzed again, the sound shockingly loud in the silence. It was Mr. Davies. "Elara," he said, his voice as crisp as ever. "I'm glad I reached you. I've just gotten off the phone with the developers. They're aware that you've visited the property. They're anxious to close. They've increased their offer." I waited, my throat tight. "How much?" $50,000, he said. "And they'll cover all the back taxes and legal fees. It's a very generous offer, Elara. More than the land is worth, frankly. You could walk away with a clean $50,000 in your pocket. You'd be set for years. $50,000, it was a fortune. It was the easy way out my mother had described. A clean break. A new life, bought and paid for. All I had to do was say yes. Say yes, and let them turn this place, this sacred, tragic ground, into a parking lot for a luxury resort. Say yes, and let my mother's sacrifice be bulldozed and paved over. I looked around the barn, at the unfinished sculpture, at the workbench, at the letters scattered on the floor. This wasn't just a property. It was a story. It was a testament. It was the only thing she had left. And in that moment, I knew there was no choice at all. And listen, if you've made it this far into the story, it's probably because some part of this resonates. Maybe you've also had to piece together a history that was kept from you. Or maybe you faced a choice where the easy path felt wrong. These moments define us. And sharing these stories is why I'm here. If you feel that, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to the channel and join our community. Your story matters too. Now, let's get back to what happened next. The silence on the phone stretched out. Mr. Davies was waiting for an answer, probably expecting an immediate, grateful acceptance. $50,000 was a life-changing amount of money for a girl who started the day with less than 100. It was safety. It was security. It was a future free from the struggle that had defined my entire existence. I could go to college without drowning in debt. I could get an apartment in a city where no one knew my name or my story. I could be anonymous and free. But my mother's words echoed in my head. Use it to start over, or use it to fight. The choice was mine. I looked at the rusted key, still sitting on the floor beside the ammo box. It wasn't just a key to a barn. It was the key to my own history. It had unlocked the truth. And now, I had to decide what to do with that truth. Selling the land would be like locking the door again and throwing the key away forever. It would be an erasure. It would be the final victory for the forces that had taken my mother's life and art from the world. Elara, are you still there? Mr. Davies' voice cut through my thoughts. I took a deep breath, the dusty air of the barn filling my lungs. It felt like the first real breath I'd taken all day. I'm here, I said. My voice sounded different. Steadier. It's a generous offer, Mr. Davies. Please thank them for it. So you accept? He asked, a note of professional satisfaction in his tone. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it felt like the loudest sound I had ever made. I'm not selling. There was a pause. I could almost hear him recalibrating. Elara, I have to advise you, this is likely the best offer you will ever receive. The back taxes alone are nearly $5,000. The house is a teardown. You have no resources. Forgive me for being blunt, but what exactly do you plan to do? His questions were logical. They were the same questions I would have asked myself yesterday. But yesterday, I didn't know who my mother was. Yesterday, I didn't know this barn existed. Yesterday, I thought I was alone. I'm going to stay, I said, the conviction growing with each word. I'm going to pay the back taxes, and I'm going to fix this place up. With what? He asked, his tone bordering on exasperated. I looked at the heavy, oilcloth-wrapped package I had set aside earlier. My mother's last gift. Her blood money, repurposed as seed money. I have resources, I said simply. Please, just inform the developers that the property is no longer for sale. Not now, not ever. I could sense his deep sigh through the phone. As your legal counsel, I am advising you against this course of action. It's an emotional decision, not a practical one. Maybe, I said. But it's my decision. He was silent for another long moment. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted slightly. The professional armor had cracked, just a little. Very well, Elara. The property is yours. The fight will be yours too. The developers won't be happy. They can make things difficult. Let me know what you need. I'll send you the paperwork for clearing the tax lien. Thank you, Mr. Davies, I said, and I meant it. For what it's worth, he added, just before he hung up. Good luck. I ended the call and let my hand drop. A wave of something wild and terrifying and exhilarating washed over me. I had done it. I had made a choice. Not a choice based on survival or desperation, but a choice based on love and loyalty and a fierce, newfound sense of self. I had chosen the harder path. I had chosen to fight. I crawled back over to the ammo box and picked up the oilcloth package. It was heavy, dense. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside were stacks of cash, old bills bound with rubber bands that had gone brittle with age. I didn't count it, not right away. It felt sacred. It was the price of my mother's silence, the cost of her art being twisted into something ugly. And now, it was going to be the foundation of something new. It was redemption money. I spent that night in the barn. I couldn't bear the thought of the decaying house. I found some old, clean drop cloths and made a makeshift bed on the floor, using my duffel bag as a pillow. The barn was cold, but it felt safe. It felt like home. I lay there in the darkness, the vast, silent space around me, and I didn't feel alone. I felt her presence everywhere, in the scent of the wood, in the shapes of the tools silhouetted against the moonlit gaps in the roof. I felt like I was finally being held by my mother, not in her arms, but in the arms of the place she had loved. The next morning, I woke up with the first light, my body stiff and cold, but my mind clear. I had a purpose. The first step was survival. I took a small portion of the money from the box, tucked it securely in my bag, and walked the 2 miles back into town. The man at the general store, a grizzled old guy with a kind face, watched me with open curiosity as I bought a cart full of supplies. Work gloves, heavy-duty trash bags, a broom, a bucket, bottled water, and non-perishable food like crackers, peanut butter, and canned soup. "Staying out at the old Vance place, are you?" he asked as he rang me up. His voice was gravelly, but not unfriendly. I braced myself for judgment, for questions. "Yes, sir," I said, my voice quiet. He just nodded, his eyes lingering on me for a moment. "That house has been empty a long time. Your mother, she was a good woman, kept to herself, mostly. But she had a good heart." My own heart skipped a beat. He knew her. He remembered her. "You knew her?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "A little," he said, bagging my groceries. "She'd come in here sometimes, always sketching on a little pad. Saw the world differently than most folks. A real artist. It was a shame what happened." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. In his few words, he had given my mother back her humanity. She wasn't just a tragic story in a letter. She was a person who had lived and walked and sketched in this very town. She was remembered. "Thank you," I said, and the words felt inadequate. I paid for my things, and he helped me load them into 2 large cardboard boxes. "It's a long walk back," he said, looking at the heavy boxes. "Hang on a minute." He disappeared into the back of the store and came back with a set of keys. "My boy's old pickup is out back. He's off at college. You can use it to get your things out there. Just bring it back before dark." I stared at him, speechless. It was an act of unconditional kindness, something I had rarely experienced in my life. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," he grunted. "Just bring it back with a full tank of gas." I drove the rattling, old pickup truck back down the winding dirt road, my groceries and supplies bouncing in the bed. The world felt different than it had just yesterday. It was still a hard, complicated place, but for the first time, it didn't feel entirely hostile. There was kindness here. There was community, however small. There was a memory of my mother that wasn't shrouded in tragedy. When I got back to the property, I didn't go to the house. I went to the barn. I opened the great door and let the sunlight flood in. And then, I picked up the broom, and I started to sweep. It was a small act, but it felt momentous. With each stroke, I was clearing away the dust of years. I was clearing away the neglect, the sadness, the forgetting. I was claiming the space, my space, our space. The work had begun. The days that followed blurred into a routine of hard, physical labor. My first priority was to make the barn livable. The house was a lost cause for now, a project for another year, maybe another lifetime. But the barn was solid. It was my fortress. I started by cleaning. I swept away mountains of dust and grime. I scrubbed the floors. I washed the few intact windows until they sparkled, letting clean, bright light pour into the workshop for the first time in nearly 2 decades. I used a portion of the money my mother had left to pay the back taxes, sending a certified check to the county office with a letter from Mr. Davies. It felt like severing the last tie to the system that had owned me, and the last threat the developers held over me. With the property legally and truly mine, the work felt different. It wasn't just an act of survival anymore, it was an act of creation. Every nail I hammered, every board I replaced, was a word in a new story I was writing for this place. I bought a small wood-burning stove and, with the help of a YouTube tutorial and a lot of nervous trial and error, installed it in a corner of the barn. The first time I lit a fire in it, the warmth that spread through the vast space felt like a miracle. It was the first home I had ever warmed myself. I bought a sleeping bag, a camp mattress, and a solar-powered generator for a single lamp and to charge my phone. My living quarters were Spartan, but they were mine. I ate my simple meals sitting at my mother's workbench, surrounded by her tools. I started to clean them, carefully removing the rust, sharpening the blades, oiling the moving parts. Each tool I restored felt like I was reconnecting with a piece of her. I found her old sketchbooks. Unlike the blank canvases, these were full. They were filled with drawings of the woods, of the decaying house, of the light falling through the trees. And they were filled with studies of hands, of faces, of figures reaching and twisting. I saw the genesis of the unfinished sculpture in the center of the room. I saw her mind at work. I felt like I was finally getting to know her, not through her tragedy, but through her passion. The developers didn't give up easily. A week after I refused their offer, a man in a suit showed up in a shiny black SUV. He was smooth and polite, but his eyes were cold. He talked about progress, about the economic benefits of the resort. He called my property an eyesore and an impediment. He made a new offer, $75,000. I stood on the porch of the collapsing house, my hands covered in dirt, and looked him in the eye. "This place is not for sale," I said. He smiled a tight, unpleasant smile. "Things can get difficult for a young woman out here all alone," he said, the words a veiled threat. "I'm not alone," I said, and the words surprised me. But as I said them, I realized they were true. I had the barn. I had my mother's memory. I had a purpose. He left, his tires spinning in the gravel driveway, leaving a cloud of dust behind. The encounter left me shaken, but also resolute. This was the fight my mother had warned me about. This was the choice I had made. A few days later, a notice was posted on my gate, a citation from the county for unsafe structures, referring to the house. It was a clear attempt to pressure me, to bury me in fines and legal battles. I took a picture of it and emailed it to Mr. Davies. His reply was swift. "They're trying to bleed you dry. Don't worry, I'll handle this." And he did. He filed the necessary paperwork, arguing for a grace period for repairs, citing my recent inheritance. He was no longer just a lawyer I had spoken to on the phone. He was becoming an ally. My small world was slowly expanding. It wasn't just me against the world anymore. It was me and Mr. Davies and the gruff but kind man at the general store and the memory of my mother. It was a small army, but it was my army. As autumn deepened into winter, the work became a rhythm, a meditation. The first snow fell, blanketing the property in a pristine layer of white. The world became quiet, muffled. From inside the warm barn, I watched the snow pile up, and I felt a sense of peace I had never known. I had survived. More than that, I was building a life. One afternoon, driven by an impulse I didn't understand, I uncovered my mother's unfinished sculpture. I had left it draped since my first day here, its form too full of her absence. But now, it looked different. It didn't look like an ending. It looked like a beginning. I ran my hands over the cold metal of the armature. Her hands had twisted this wire. Her vision had shaped this form. I picked up one of her sketchbooks and found the drawings for it. The figure was meant to be breaking free, its arms reaching not in desperation, but in triumph. It was a sculpture about liberation. I found the bags of plaster I had seen in the corner. They were hard as rock, but I remembered seeing my mother's notes about mixing her own from raw materials. I found her recipes. I found the raw lime, sand, and other materials stored in sealed bins. I spent a week experimenting, mixing small batches, learning the feel of the material, how it responded to water, to my hands. My first attempts were clumsy, a mess. But I didn't give up. I kept trying, my hands learning a new language, a new muscle memory. And then, one day, I mixed a perfect batch. It was smooth, pliable. I took a deep breath and approached the sculpture. I scooped up a handful of wet plaster and pressed it onto the wire armature. My hands, which had only ever known how to hold on, to pack, to leave, were now creating something. I wasn't just fixing her home, I was finishing her work. I wasn't my mother, I didn't have her years of training, her innate genius. But I had her hands, I had her spirit, and I had her story. As I worked, I thought about the word inheritance. Before, it had meant a problem to solve, a sum of money to be claimed. But now, I understood. My inheritance wasn't the land, or the money, or the decaying house. It was this barn. It was the tools. It was the unfinished sculpture. It was the choice to stay, to fight, to build. It was the story itself. The terrible, beautiful story of my mother's love. An inheritance isn't something you are given. It's something you must choose to accept. It's a responsibility you pick up. It's a story you decide to continue. Home, I was learning, wasn't a place you find. It was a place you make. You make it with your own two hands, with sweat and with tears, with love and with memory. You make it by choosing to stay when it would be easier to leave. You make it by defending it. You make it by sweeping the floors and fixing the roof and lighting a fire against the cold. You make it by taking a rusted key and turning it in a lock, opening a door not just to a building, but to your own future. The sculpture began to take shape under my hands. It was slow, painstaking work. But with every layer of plaster, I felt like I was healing something inside myself. I was building a monument, not just to her, but to us. To the life we never had, and the connection we had finally found. The fight with the developers wasn't over. I knew there would be more challenges, more threats, more attempts to wear me down. But I was no longer the scared, lost girl who had stepped off that bus. I had a home. I had a purpose. I had my mother's strength flowing through my veins. I was no longer a ward of the state. I was the keeper of the flame. And so, my story isn't really over. In many ways, it's just beginning. The sculpture is still not finished. The house is still a ruin, waiting for its turn. The winter is long, and the developers are patient. But something fundamental has changed. I am no longer defined by what I lost. I am defined by what I have chosen to build. This place, this inheritance, has taught me that the most valuable things we are left with are not material. They are the stories, the sacrifices, the love that came before us. And our true inheritance is the opportunity to honor those things, to pick up the tools, and to continue the work. It's about rewriting the narrative you were handed. My file said I was the daughter of an unstable transient, but I am the daughter of Sarah Vance, a brilliant artist, a fierce protector, a woman who built a sanctuary with her own 2 hands. My story is not one of abandonment. It is a story of love, of sacrifice, and of finding my way home. And I want to ask you, what does home mean to you? Have you ever had to fight for your story, to reclaim a history that was lost or hidden? I truly believe that sharing these experiences is how we find our strength and how we realize we aren't alone. Please, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your stories inspire me more than you know. If this story meant something to you, if you believe in second chances and the power of fighting for what you love, consider subscribing to the channel. We're more than just a channel. We are a community of people who understand that sometimes the most beautiful things have to be built from the ruins. Thank you for listening. And for me, well, the fire is lit in the stove, the snow is falling outside, and I have work to do.